I'm especially grateful that the California Fish and Game Commission helped convene the first Hitch Summit 2 years ago to bring agencies together in a way that they've never been brought together, ever. Agencies weren't talking to each other about this, and now they are on a frequent basis, as Felipe LaLuz will tell you more. I'm going to give it over to him, and thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Today's kind of a special day for me. 2 years ago, Sarah Ryan brought some tribal elders and some other staff from various other tribes, tribal EPAs, to the Fish and Game Commission. I was just starting in my job. I'm a native minnow enthusiast. There's a few of us out here. And so I'm watching the Fish and Game Commission meeting going like, there's this native minnow, this is on the horizon. So elevated it, told my management, and they said, well, take care of it. So that kind of looped me into this process. So I've been at this for 2 years. I feel like I can't really play the new guy card anymore, but I still have a lot to learn, and just want to express my gratitude for this community. Every time I come out here, I make new connections, and that's really what this talk is about, to kick off the Hitch session and really highlight some of the projects and talk about how we all really need to work together to conserve the species. And also talk about the connectivity between the Hitch and the landscape and the people in the region. So my name is Felipe LaLuz. I'm a senior environmental scientist with CDFW. I facilitate the Clear Lake Hitch Task Force. I don't get to go out in the field very much anymore, but I do really enjoy coming out, interacting with all of you people. So thank you for being here. And without further delay, I'm going to talk about the Clear Lake Hitch conservation movement, which is really what we're part of. Not advancing slides. Okay. That's what this is all about, community. I get some feedback from all of y'all. Well, I already have my first slide memorized, so I'm just going to give a brief overview. Most of us know Clear Lake Hitch is a native minnow. I love that phrase. I'll say it often. They're endemic to the Clear Lake watershed, so they're a subspecies of Hitch. Hands off. There we go. So just an overview of my talk. I'm going to give a brief species description. I know many of you are familiar with the Hitch, much more familiar than I am, but I'll give some highlights. What I really want to focus on is the structure of the stressors, and I'll define stressors later in the talk, and how that structure shapes our solutions, the solutions that we're looking for. I'm going to talk about some of the conservation challenges, both biological and physical and cultural. Talk a little bit about some next steps and provide some information about how you all can stay involved as members of the public, as members of the scientific community, and so on. So Clear Lake Hitch, as I mentioned, is a subspecies of Hitch. Endemic to the Clear Lake watershed. They occur nowhere else. They're a lake-adapted form of Hitch, and historically occurred in much greater numbers. And to say that they're culturally significant is an understatement. It's not my place to speak to that, but I do want to just say that out loud, not only to the, Pomo people, but they really, from my past 2 years here, have really been a symbol and a gathering point, a focal point for those of us that are conservation minded. We don't really talk a lot about the ecological function of Hitch, but I just want to briefly touch on that. I think of native fishes as a bellwether, as a biological indicator, and this was spoken about a little earlier. But the status of the Hitch really reflects the health of the population. And so one of my mantras is, what's good for the Hitch is good for the lake, and it's good for the county, because we're all really connected. Hitch, I've heard them referred to as the salmon of the Pomo. There's a lot of research on salmon showing how they are nutrient transport mechanisms that bring nutrients from the ocean up into the mountains. And hitch likely serve a similar role, not only feeding at the bottom of the trophic level, being an important food source for other animals and people, but also move nutrients throughout the watershed. And we don't really think about them as kind of a mechanism to sustain the health of the watershed, but that's really what they are. Next slide, please. That's not it. I think I'm hitting the right button. It's on. I got a laser. All right. So now I'm Matt Young. This is not my talk. Just bear with us, folks. A song about the hitch. I gotta save that for the poetry slam. I need that much time to write it. This session's off to a great start. But I think one of the strengths of this community is we've really been able to overcome a lot of challenges, and we'll keep supporting each other. Appreciate all your patience. I'm glad I've gotten over my stage fright. It's still not my talk. There we go. There we go. All right. Thank you. Round of applause for our AV techs here. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll try to get us back on schedule. Hitch used the entire watershed. This figure here is from Matt Young's paper, where he looked at eye lenses and really showed how he used some pretty advanced, sophisticated science to show that Hitch used the entire watershed. And so migration allows organisms to utilize different resources at different life stages. This is a pretty common life history strategy, especially among California native species. And so hitch, as we know, undergo a seasonal spawning migration. So in the spring, they swim up the tributaries to spawn, and it allows them to utilize, a diverse habitat. There is documentation of them spawning within the lake. Unfortunately, there's also documentation of carp preying on those eggs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the reason I put this slide up here is to show that while they are capable of using many different habitats, depending on their life stage and what habitat they're in, that exposes them to different specific stressors. And by stressors, I'm just using this broad definition as a factor that prevents an organism from completing its life cycle. So we can think of stressors in many ways. An acute specific stressor, for example, would be a bear coming along and eating a hitch. That hitch is no longer part of the population and will not contribute and replace itself. So that's a really obvious thing. But many of these stressors are complex, overlapping, and cumulative. And so by that, I mean that a hitch that doesn't have adequate habitat isn't going to be as healthy. It's going to be more susceptible to disease and predation. Put on top of that poor water quality, and you get this trifecta of impacts that will prevent the hitch from completing its life cycle. You can only kill a fish once. So hitch need to survive their spawning migration. That egg needs to hatch. That larvae needs to rear and grow. That juvenile needs to out-migrate and then survive predation within the lake for at least a year or maybe two before it can replace itself. So at every step of this life cycle, they are experiencing different stressors. And so I just put these three examples here: habitat loss, predation, and water quality. This is by no means a complete list. And I'm going to talk about how these three, I've been using them to kind of think about how to approach conservation from a high level view. So a good example that we've heard about this morning of a management action is the Common Carp and Goldfish Management Project headed by Robinson Rancheria. this is one program with many benefits. So we have the immediate benefit of reducing egg predation if we can get the population low enough to make an effect. And the feasibility study that Luis talked about earlier really shows that these coordinated, planned out collection events, when they form these big aggregations of winter, we can really target the carp without really impacting other species. And, that call for how do we use these carp is serious. So if we have other plans, a big part of this effort is crowdsourcing solutions. So that's an immediate, obvious solution, is egg predation, reducing egg predation. Luis also talked about tule bed disruption. So that addresses rearing habitat. And then substrate disturbance, which affects nutrient mobilization and sediment mobilization. So this is one program that has these multiple benefits that affects all life stages of the hitch, from egg through adult. So these are the types of solutions that we need to look for to maximize efficiency, get the biggest bang for our buck and really make a big impact. Kind of the overview. I thought about putting a werewolf up here, but there's no silver bullet. And that's kind of my take home message here is we need to find these many, many benefits to address the many impacts that hitch face. We talked a lot about habitat loss as a single problem, but once you start to dive into it, it's many problems. So thinking back to Matt Young's figure of the different habitat types, habitat is a really broad term. So we need to think about it in all those facets from different angles. So thinking of tributaries, of course, there are barriers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We heard about flow that the State Water Resources Control Board is looking into. Later, we'll have a recording from Jenna Rindy, who couldn't be here, about the in-stream flow program that's tying in flow with hitch passage. And that study was inspired and builds off of Big Valley Rancheria's work in their 2D hydrodynamics model with Flow West. So just a good example of how we can work together, build on the work that each other have done, and really make some progress. In the tributaries, we also need to think about habitat quality. Gravel, so we worry about sedimentation, water temperature. Is there sufficient riparian vegetation to keep the waters cool enough for these eggs and larvae to survive while they're in the tributaries? Big tool that we've been utilizing, we're really grateful for Robinson Rancheria, Habimatalel, and Big Valley for conducting these fish rescues. They actually go in and collect adults and larvae, transport them down to the lake. This is a huge service to the department. We're really grateful for it. Moving a little bit downstream to the littoral zone, we have community organizations, Lake County Land Trust, Terra, that are undergoing wetland restorations, doing prescribed burns to support the littoral habitat, which is important rearing habitat. This picture here is the Big Valley shoreline where they're doing tule planting, important habitat for juvenile fish. And then we have the county shoreline stewardship program, where they're actually actively going on, removing non-native species, working with landowners to restore this wetland. Moving out into the lake is a whole different beast. And so Blue Ribbon Committee and the Turk have been doing, and UC Davis have been doing great work on nutrient source tracking and dissolved oxygen monitoring. Fred up here at USGS has a great paper showing how dissolved oxygen in the summertime really compacts the habitat available to hitch. And that has other effects, concentrating them, reducing the amount of resources that are available to them. I mean, many of us are familiar with fish kills that we see seasonally. And then Big Valley, again, just another leader with their cyanotoxin monitoring. So these are just some examples. The list is far too great for me to cover in a talk, but these are just some examples about how many different organizations, from federal government to state government to local government to citizens to Lake County Land Trust to the Lake County Land Stewards and the Farm Bureau, are all kind of taking a bite out of this big problem. So I did mention barriers. When a species gets listed, so Clear Lake Hitch is a state listed species, the department, when they're petitioned to be listed, the department does a status review. And one of the big, more easily understandable stressors that we've noticed is that they've lost an estimated 92% of spawning habitat blocked by barriers. And this is an example of that. This is a little road on Manning Creek. We were able to do this, to install this little fish ladder, and it looks kind of silly, but we actually have footage of Hitch using this, allowing them to move up past Manning Creek. This would not have been possible without cooperation from the landowner. The landowner approached us and said, hey, we noticed them accumulating here. Our district biologist, Ben Ewing, who's going to give a talk later, went out, worked with some of our folks in our HabCon group and got this little fish ladder installed. So we're looking for these sorts of projects. We don't have eyes everywhere. So this is just another crowdsourcing appeal. Like, if you guys know of a spot that's a barrier, if you're having problems, come let us know, come talk to us, and we'll find some solutions. We're going to start working with the county on various projects, and many are already underway. There's also organizational challenges. And so once you start thinking about stressors, this is just a Venn diagram from hell. So we got harmful algal blooms, we got habitat loss, we got predation, we got sediment, we got poor water quality, climate change. All of these interact in ways that we don't fully understand. But we do know that if we address a few of them, it's good. And so, again, there's no silver bullet, and we don't want to let perfection stand in the way of progress. We're working with cumulative and complex stressors. All of these layer on top of each other, and there's multiple organizations with multiple different efforts. And like I said, every time I come out, every time I get on the call, I learn of something new. So again, it's all about community, and that's what the theme of my talk is about. We are also working through multiple jurisdictions, so we're dealing with projects on tribal land, on public land, on private land, sometimes having to deal with Caltrans permitting, sometimes always having to deal with state permitting, but it results in a complex regulatory landscape that can sometimes be difficult to navigate. But however, all of us are experts in our own field, and coming together, we can, navigate this instead of, trying to muddle through on our own. And then just to add another layer, we're dealing with multiple funding sources that each have different requirements, different reporting requirements. So again, there's no single solution. The solution is through collaboration and communication. And just seeing all the talks here today and yesterday, and some of the meetings that have been going on, the groups I'm involved with, we really have some great partners, again, at multiple levels. Blue Ribbon Committee, of course, taking a big charge, but also the community organizations, which I've mentioned already. We're also working on conservation strategy, which is difficult, to try and develop a governance structure that takes into account everybody's needs and wants, and directs everybody and kind of gets everybody moving in the same direction. It's not an easy lift, and we've been at it for quite some time. And then coming into my wheelhouse, we have a Clear Lake Hitch Task Force and summits, and this is more of a government organizational theme, originally initiated about 2 years ago. So the task force originated from a government-to-government consultation, recognizing that the tribal governments are sovereign nations and treating them as such. So Sarah, Luis, Daniela, Patricia Franklin, all of you all, I look at, I give you the same respect that I give Director Bonham or Carla Nemeth or the director of any of our other partner agencies. And I think that's given us a lot of progress, just the acknowledgement that these are sovereign nations and should be treated as such. We've held 2 summits and we're planning the 3rd. These summits are high level to get our management in the room and focus their attention and really say like, hey, like these are the issues we're facing. These are the gaps in resources or jurisdiction. You guys get paid a lot of money, so give us some solutions. And then we have the task force, which is really to coordinate on the ground field work projects, identify funding sources, and share information. Unfortunately, it's not open to the public. It is a government meeting, but we are finding other ways like this to really bridge that gap and get the public, involved and educated, and really hear some solutions. These are just some of our collaborators. I'm not going to leave this up. Again, it's a big group, and it's always growing and kind of always in flux in what we're focusing on. Just to report on some of the outcomes and commitments from the 2023 summit. Many agencies committed staff and funding. Our department promised me for another year, so you guys still have me. So to have this kind of coordination role. We've also have a strong commitment to co-management and really listening to the tribes, listening to the local governments, and not being like, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. We really do value that input and learn a lot from the entire community. Of course, supporting research and monitoring and restoration, and again, that conservation strategy. We also identified areas that we need to improve, and that's the strength of science, is that we keep looping back and saying, like, how can we do this better? Where are our data gaps? So surface to groundwater interaction with the State Water Resources Control Board and Big Valley Rancheria are really taking a big bite out of the problem by looking at this. We're also looking at biological data. The county, the tribes, CDFW, USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service all have their own separate sources of data. And we're looking for ways to combine this. One of the conversations coming up recently in the Clear Lake Hitch Task Force is forming a data subgroup and a data clearinghouse where we could get all the data together, look at our methods, make sure that the methods talk to each other, and go from there. Because we can really learn a lot. There's a ton of coverage. And then we're trying to, of course, stepping up enforcement of existing regulations for illicit cannabis and illegal water diversions, and resolve habitat and life cycle uncertainties. For example, 2023 taught us a lot about habitat connectivity and brought up some new hypotheses that we need to really look into. We saw a lot of adult fish that we weren't expecting. We were thrilled. It was a big relief for me. But it does raise some questions about how to Hitch utilize these smaller ponds. And are there like little meta populations that support the larger population? And that's a big question that's going to take a lot of us to answer. So how can the public help? Of course, share your data. And this is going for the scientific community as well. Share your data, even just observations. If you know that this is a problem, where hitch tend to congregate or tend to get stuck. If there's regular stranding events, let us know. Report stranded hitch to CDFW or tribal EPA. And just to stress to everybody, this is a threatened species. You cannot go out and grab them and rescue them yourselves. The tribes have a permit to handle them, so please just report them instead of trying to move them yourselves. And then report barriers. We don't know about barriers on private lands. We're not out here during the rainstorms, so we really rely on our partners to be our eyes. And of course, pollution, report either to the county or the local EPA. And then here are some ways to stay informed. I'm going to, I believe these talks will be available for download. So just go ahead and look at these. And here's some contact information, mostly CDFW heavy because that's the lens I'm looking through. Just kind of speaks to where I'm coming from. But if you have specific questions about cannabis, about our in-stream flow study, or general fish questions, and if you don't know who to contact me. I feel like my role now is just kind of plugging the right people in together and making sure people can work together. And with that, I'll take a couple questions. Yeah.
Through this whole conference, it seems that carp is a big red threat, threatening a lot of problems, or creating a lot of problems. Now, commercial carp fishing was a big thing in the lake at one time. Did the market dry up? Did people give up just because they were old or whatever? But wouldn't that be an option to get rid of a lot of carp?
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the market forces. I do know carp are not one of the regularly consumed food fish that we tend to think about. I feel like the whole world eats carp except for us. The work that Luis is doing really doesn't have a market. I know Luis has been working really hard trying to find a way somewhere to put these carp, be that in a fertilizer factory or a food source. So I don't know why it's no longer commercially viable, but if we can find a market for them, like definitely we do. If you want to take some, I can get you some.
Well, I don't have a cat.
Yeah. Right, any other questions? And we will have a panel discussion at the end, but I think we can queue up our next talk.